My name is Rachel Whitman. I'm 42 years old, a federal judge in the Southern District of Illinois. I've spent the last 2 decades listening to polished lies and unraveling truths in courtrooms that echo with tension. My title might impress strangers, but at home, I'm still just the too serious sister. They always said I was too quiet, too intense, too cold. Funny how people use too to disguise the fact that what they really mean is not like us. I've sentenced men who embezzled billions and smiled doing it. I've stared down attorneys who thought interrupting a woman in a robe was some kind of power move. And yet, none of that prepared me for the look my own sister gave me across a ballroom full of strangers, like I was the embarrassing secret she forgot to hide. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand respect. I simply told the truth. And that was enough to silence 100 mouths that used to call me invisible. People assume the courtroom is where I learn to stay calm, to sit still, while chaos buzzes like hornets around me. But that's not where it started. No. I learned silence much earlier, around the dinner table in a modest brick home on the outskirts of Springfield, Illinois. My little sister Madison had the kind of presence that swallowed rooms whole. She had golden curls, a tinkling laugh, and an uncanny ability to cry on command. My parents adored her. It wasn't subtle. She could spill juice on the carpet and turn it into a charming story. I once corrected a history fact at school and got sent to my room for embarrassing the teacher. "You just take things too seriously." Rachel, my mom, would sigh, buttering a roll, while Madison told another exaggerated tale about gym class. My dad would grunt in agreement, eyes never leaving the sports page. At first, I tried harder. I tried to be funny, tried to be softer, tried to speak in the right moments. But somehow, my voice always felt like the wrong kind of noise. Eventually, I stopped trying. I let Madison shine, and I stepped back. It wasn't that I was jealous of her, not exactly. She had her own gifts. But the way people responded to her laughter, her messiness, her chaos, it made me wonder if maybe goodness had to come dressed in glitter to be noticed. She once told people I was adopted from the local library. I swear she laughed. She even smells like old books. Everyone roared. I didn't. By high school, our paths were set. Madison threw parties and wore eyeliner like war paint. I stayed home reading court opinions and annotating legal briefs on napkins. I knew I wanted to become a judge by the time I was 15. Madison didn't know what she wanted, but people told her she could be anything. Nobody asked me what I wanted. They just appreciated that I didn't cause problems. So I made it a habit staying out of the way. I learned how to disappear in plain sight. I blended in with beige. I wore navy and gray and moved quietly through rooms where people were too loud to notice me. But in my mind, I was sharpening, building, preparing. I wasn't bitter. I was patient. There's this myth that silence means submission, that quiet people are just waiting for someone to give them permission to matter. But that's not it. Some of us are silent because we know words can be weapons, and we're just learning how to aim. I remember one Thanksgiving, Madison had brought home a new boyfriend, some junior marketing exec from Chicago, who thought his degree gave him authority on everything from foreign policy to pie crusts. He looked me up and down and asked if I was still doing that paralegal thing. I was halfway through my second year of law school. I didn't correct him. What would be the point? My own family didn't remember where I studied, let alone what I achieved. They remembered me as the one who didn't smile in pictures. So I leaned into the role they'd assigned me. Quiet, distant, unrelatable. It gave me room. While Madison was bouncing between community college courses and failed internships, I was interning under a federal judge who taught me how to recognize a liar before they opened their mouth. While she learned how to tilt her head and flirt her way out of speeding tickets, I was memorizing statutes and watching justice unfold in real time. I still sent birthday cards, still showed up for mom's gallbladder surgery, still signed the get well bouquet when dad had knee replacement, but I was never one of them. I was adjacent, present but peripheral. And I told myself I was okay with that, because I had my own world now, one where people stood when I entered, where my words carried legal weight, where my opinions were published and debated in law journals. But deep down, some part of me still watched from the sidelines, wondering what it would take to be seen by the people who had always looked right through me. I used to imagine it would be a headline, or a courtroom victory, or maybe just one heartfelt phone call. But none of that came. Instead, it came in the form of a glossy white envelope, scented with perfume I couldn't name, addressed with perfect calligraphy. Madison Dalton and Ryan Hawthorne. Request the honor of your presence. It was an invitation to her engagement party, and the beginning of something I didn't know I needed to finish. The thing about not being seen is eventually you get used to it. You start navigating the world like it's a courtroom where no one called your name. You learn how to enter a room without making waves, how to keep your voice just loud enough to be heard, but never sharp enough to demand attention. So I stopped waiting for my parents to notice. Stopped expecting them to ask how finals went, or if I made law review. They never did, not once. When my acceptance letter to Northwestern Law came in the mail, it was the first piece of paper I held with my name on it that made me feel powerful. Not pretty, not liked, just undeniable. I left home without fanfare, no farewell dinner, no advice. My mom hugged me with one arm while folding laundry. My dad muttered something about staying safe and went back to ESPN. It hurt, but only because I still let it. That faded soon enough. Law school was hard, harder than I imagined. It stripped away every illusion I had about fairness and made me reconstruct justice from the bones up. But I loved it. I thrived in those cold lecture halls and midnight study groups. I stopped being the weird sister and started becoming something formidable. I graduated early, passed the bar on my first try, and clerked for a federal judge who told me, "You've got fire under all that calm." From there, I prosecuted white-collar crime, fraud, embezzlement, bribery. I stood in front of men in custom-tailored suits who tried to talk over me and watched them fold when I calmly laid out their guilt piece by piece like a blueprint soaked in truth. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just spoke with the kind of weight that made people sit up straighter. By 38, I was nominated to the bench. Southern District of Illinois, the youngest female federal judge in the state. They put my photo on the front page of the St. Louis Metro Times. It showed me standing on the courthouse steps in my robes, arms crossed, looking like everything I'd spent my life building. They wrote about my cases, my reputation, my rise. I sent the paper to my parents. Just one copy, folded neatly. No note. They never called. Not to say congratulations, not to say they saw it. And honestly, that silence was louder than any applause they could have given. By then, I had my own rhythm. My mornings started with black coffee and legal briefs. My evenings ended in chambers surrounded by transcripts and the hum of fluorescent lights. There was peace in it, not joy exactly, but control. And maybe that's all I ever really wanted. I didn't miss Madison. Not really. We saw each other at obligatory events, holidays, family birthdays, the occasional forced reunion where Mom insisted we play nice. She'd arrive late, flustered, dazzling in sequins and stories that didn't hold up to questioning. Always some new job in PR or marketing or strategic something or other. She'd hug me too tightly and call me Rach like we were kids again, and then float away to tell someone at the buffet line how exhausting her social calendar was. Meanwhile, I sat at the far end of the table peeling labels off wine bottles and answering questions no one asked. At one 4th of July barbecue, I brought a colleague, another judge from the district. No one noticed. Madison introduced me as my sister who works in government stuff. He laughed. I didn't. It wasn't that I needed them to be proud. I'd stopped craving that years ago. But I did wonder, how could people who claim to love you never bother to learn anything about you? And then came the invitation. The envelope was white, thick, and expensive. Rose gold lettering. A subtle perfume clung to the inside like someone sprayed the air above it and hoped the scent would sell the story. Madison Whitman and Ryan Hawthorne cordially invite you. No +1, no handwritten note. Just a printed card and a text the next day that read, "Hi sis, don't feel like you have to come if you're busy." Ryan's family is kind of a big deal, so try not to wear anything too serious. Too serious, like that was a bad thing. She had no idea how serious I'd become, how many lives I'd changed with the swing of a gavel. How many lawyers with Ivy League resumes had called me Your Honor with voices trembling under the weight of consequence. But that was Madison. She didn't know me because she never asked. And I stopped offering pieces of myself to people who only wanted the surface. Still, something in me stirred, not out of spite, not revenge, but something deeper, a quiet resolve. I didn't owe anyone a performance, but I did owe it to myself to stop letting their story define me. So I bought a dress. Not flashy tailored black clean lines, the kind of thing I'd wear on the bench. Elegant, unapologetic. I booked a direct flight, rented my own car, declined the hotel room she suggested. I wasn't going for her. I wasn't even going for them. I was going for the silence. The one that had wrapped around me like armor for years, and the one I was finally ready to shed. The estate sat high on a hill in St. Charles overlooking the river like it had something to prove. Manicured hedges, valet parking, the kind of place people don't rent because they love it. They rent it because they want others to know they could. The welcome sign had Madison's name in a large gold script. Beneath it, Ryan's name smaller, almost like an afterthought. And that told me everything I needed to know. I'd arrived 5 minutes early, always 5, never more. Just enough to show I was intentional, never desperate. I stayed in the car for a moment, watching the guests trickle in. Laughter spilled like champagne through the front doors. People in dresses with creases still fresh from dry cleaner bags, shiny shoes, camera-ready smiles. I wasn't nervous. Not exactly. I was ready. The kind of ready that comes when you've rehearsed the worst-case scenarios so many times in your head nothing surprises you anymore. I stepped out of the car and straightened my dress. No sequins, no plunging neckline, just tailored black sharp deliberate. The same color I wore to court when I needed a jury to listen. At the entrance, a young woman with perfect posture handed me a flute of champagne and said, "Welcome." She didn't ask my name, didn't know who I was. Perfect. Inside the room buzzed. Chandeliers sparkled overhead like frozen fire, and a string quartet played near the fireplace. Vivaldi, maybe. Something light. Forgettable. Madison was at the center of course, orbiting between guests in a blush-pink gown that shimmered every time she turned. She laughed like a woman who had never known the weight of consequence. People orbited around her like moths to a warm light. I stayed near the back, sipping quietly, watching. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that. But beauty, I've learned, has very little to do with character. It's the wrapping paper people stare at so they don't have to deal with what's inside. I spotted our parents near the bar. Dad was older, slower, but still wore that same passive expression he'd carried all through my childhood. Present, but disengaged. Mom, on the other hand, was beaming, dressed in something too youthful for her age, dripping in a necklace I recognized as a gift I'd sent her years ago, a gift she'd never acknowledged. She caught sight of me, paused, smiled with polite confusion like she was trying to place a distant relative, then turned back to her friends. Not a wave, not a word. It hit me then, more sharp than sad, I wasn't part of this world. And maybe I never had been. I found a seat tucked behind one of the floral centerpieces, massive white hydrangeas that smelled like expensive wedding catalogs. From there, I could see everything without being seen. I wasn't hiding. I was choosing where to stand. And then Madison saw me. She glided over like she was on wheels, radiating social performance energy. Air kiss to the left, to the right. Hands soft but distant. Her voice pitched an octave higher than normal, the way some people do when they want their words to float above the room. "Well, look who made it," she said with a smile that barely touched her eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Didn't think this kind of thing was really your vibe." "It usually isn't," I said, matching her tone with one of my own. But I had the time. Her gaze slid down my dress. "Black, huh?" she quipped. "Bold choice for an engagement party." I didn't bother explaining. Black wasn't a statement, it was my baseline. The color of seriousness, of steel, of things not meant to be trifled with. "I figured someone needed to ground the palate," I replied. She blinked clearly, unsure if I was joking, then leaned in and whispered, "Just try not to make things awkward, okay? Ryan's family is, well, they ask a lot of questions, and they're big on appearances." I held her gaze. Then maybe they'll get some real answers. Her laugh was a little too loud, a little too forced. She waved her hand like I'd made a harmless joke. Classic Rach, always so intense. And just like that, she drifted away again, laughing, gliding, performing. I exhaled slowly and took another sip. Intense. It was always that word. Not smart, not serious, not driven, just intense. As if being thoughtful was offensive. as if being grounded made others uncomfortable. I stayed put, alone, watching, until Ryan came over. He was taller than I expected, handsome in a politician kind of way, smiling with both palms out, talking like he practiced empathy in front of a mirror. "Rachel Wright," he said, holding a glass of bourbon. "Madison's sister." I nodded. "That's me," he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She doesn't talk about you much. I wasn't sure if you two were close." "We're sisters," I said simply. He chuckled awkwardly. "She said you work in, what was it, county records?" I tilted my head slightly. "Something like that." He nodded, satisfied. Didn't ask more. That was Madison's version of me, neutral. Background, harmless, and that was fine. Let them underestimate me. Some truths aren't handed out like party favors. Some truths need a proper setting like a courtroom, or a microphone, or a crystal-lit room full of people pretending they knew everything, until they heard what really mattered. And soon, they would. Dinner was served just after sunset. The chandeliers dimmed slightly, casting a soft golden hue over linen tablecloths and centerpieces tall enough to block conversation. A curated playlist hummed from invisible speakers. Frank Sinatra, Norah Jones, the kind of music chosen not to inspire emotion but to be conveniently ignored. I sat alone. They'd assigned me a seat at the far end of a long table next to an elderly couple who seemed more interested in the wine than their surroundings. The name card in front of me was typed in generic serif font. Ms. Rachel Whitman, no title, no mention of who I was in relation to the bride, which of course was the point. I poked at a plate of smoked duck that had gone cold. Madison, meanwhile, glowed from the center of the room. Guests leaned in to hear her speak, their laughter curling up toward the vaulted ceiling like incense. She told stories about childhood, about me. I wasn't always this put together, she announced, her voice pitched for drama. Soft laughter. I mean, growing up, I was the wild one. My sister Rachel was the opposite, so serious, so by the book. She paused the way a performer does right before the punchline. She once filed a formal complaint because I borrowed her sweater without asking. More laughter. I didn't flinch. "She's always been that way," Madison said, waving a manicured hand in dismissal. "Judgy. Rigid. Honestly, I'm just grateful she showed up tonight. She's not exactly big on family gatherings. Or, smiling." She looked directly at me, held the gaze for just a second longer than necessary, then winked. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the choreography, the precision of it all. She didn't want to exclude me. She wanted to display me. Ryan, ever the diplomat, leaned in and chuckled. "Be nice," he whispered to her, loud enough for the nearby table to hear. Then he turned to me, smiling like we shared a harmless inside joke. "But really, we're lucky she made time," he said. "Cam told me you work in, what was it again, admin?" My fork rested lightly beside my untouched plate. I didn't look at him. Not yet. Or maybe county records, he added, sipping his drink. Either way sounds like important paperwork. And there it was. The insult dipped in casual charm. It wasn't cruel. It was smaller than that. It was the kind of remark that erases people without even trying. A narrative so practiced it didn't need fact. I glanced at Madison. Her smile stretched like a cat's. Relaxed. Confident. She thought once again I would let it slide. That I would smile politely. That I would nod and fade into the decor like I always had. But this time I didn't. I met Ryan's gaze and spoke calmly, evenly. "I'm sorry," I said. "Where did you hear that?" He blinked. "Madison mentioned something about you working in government," he said. I let the moment stretch. Let the silence lean in. Let the tension bloom in the space where their confidence used to be. "No," I said. "That's not correct." Madison laughed nervously. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic." "She's right," I said, still looking at Ryan. "I don't work in office administration." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm a federal judge." You could feel it ripple. Like the air had shifted. Like the walls themselves had inhaled and didn't know how to exhale. From a nearby table, a voice spoke up. "Wait, Judge Whitman." Heads turned. Someone gasped. A woman near the bar narrowed her eyes. Didn't she handle the Bricker case, she whispered. That sentencing made national news. I heard it. So did Madison. Ryan looked at me like he was seeing something beneath the surface of a painting, something he hadn't realized was there. You're a judge? He asked, this time with no grin, no easy charm. I nodded once. Southern District, 11th Circuit. His hand dropped from Madison's back. She stammered, trying to salvage the moment. I didn't know you were still doing that. I thought you... She didn't finish. Because just then, the woman in green near the bar turned and said louder now, She's the one who sentenced Eastman. I remember, my brother was on that jury. More murmurs. Phones slipped out of purses. Names were Googled beneath white tablecloths. One man adjusted his tie. Another woman quietly moved her wineglass. And Madison. Her face shifted. Not angry, not smug, just cornered. She didn't know I was still doing that. She never asked, and now she couldn't pretend anymore. Silence in a courtroom is different from silence in a ballroom. In court, silence is a weapon. A pause can be strategic, pregnant. It can make a jury lean forward and a defendant shift in his seat. But in that ballroom, the silence was something else. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't elegant. It was stunned. The kind that comes after someone says the one thing everyone else had agreed, whether spoken or not, should never be said out loud. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The truth had already done the heavy lifting. I could feel eyes turning, heads pivoting. The ripples from my 4 simple words, I'm a federal judge, reached every corner of that hall faster than any toast ever had. People whispered, Googled, searched their memory. Who had they just laughed at? Who had they dismissed? A woman in a green wrap dress, someone's aunt or cousin maybe, spoke up again. She's the one from the Eastman trial, right? That was her. She gave that monster 20 years. And then it wasn't whispers anymore. It was full attention. Ryan's mouth parted slightly, but nothing came out. Madison's eyes scanned the room like she was trying to locate the exit before the moment collapsed on her. And I just sat there, still, upright, calm. For once, I didn't feel small in a crowded room. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not because I demanded it, but because the weight I carried finally cracked through the polished floorboards of their carefully curated illusion. Madison tried to recover. She never told us, she said, voice thin forced. I didn't know she was still doing that. Still doing that. As if justice was a hobby. As if sitting on a federal bench was a side hustle between holiday appearances. I didn't bother correcting her. Because now everyone else was doing it for me. A man across the table, one of Ryan's uncles, if I remembered right, turned toward me. You're Judge Whitman, he asked. The one who spoke at the ethics panel last spring. I am, I replied simply. Another guest chimed in. I read your op-ed in the Chicago Tribune on judicial reform. That was sharp. I nodded again. Madison's grip on her champagne flute tightened. She tried to smile, but it wobbled. I caught her eye and held it. There was no gloating, no smirk, no satisfaction, only truth. Pure, undeniable, irreversible. She opened her mouth again, maybe to pivot, maybe to redirect, but I stood before she could find her next line, not abruptly, not for effect, just deliberately. I folded my napkin, set it gently beside the plate I hadn't touched. The room didn't quiet because I demanded it. It quieted because the balance had shifted, permanently. As I stepped away from the table, I felt the way people moved subtly, respectfully. A clearing not out of fear, but adjustment. Like they suddenly understood how much space I had always deserved and never claimed. I passed Madison. She didn't speak. Not this time. She just stared. Her expression had lost its performance. All that remained was disbelief. And something else. Shame. Ryan started to rise, maybe to follow, maybe to apologize, but he didn't move fast enough. I passed my parents. Mom's mouth was open slightly, as if forming a sentence she hadn't rehearsed. Dad looked pale. Like the gravity of everything he hadn't said to me over the years had just hit all at once. I didn't slow down, no drama, no farewell, no confrontation, just quiet, deliberate departure. Outside, the night air was cooler than before, clean, honest. I walked across the gravel driveway, heels steady, breath calm. No one called after me. Not then. But my phone buzzed before I even reached the car. A missed call from Mom, then another, then a text from Madison. "You should have told me. Why would you embarrass me like that?" As if telling the truth when asked was an act of war. As if I had humiliated her by existing fully in front of people she had lied to. I didn't respond. Not then, not ever. Because what was there to say? She never asked. None of them did. They assumed, they projected, they diminished. And when the truth stepped into the light, they didn't feel regret. They felt exposed. And exposure has a way of rearranging the room. They say when a verdict is delivered in a courtroom, you can feel the weight of it drop. Not just in the room, but in the bones of everyone present. That's how it felt walking out of that ballroom. No gavels, no jury. But judgment had still landed. The truth didn't need defending anymore. It stood on its own steady and tall. And the people who'd once laughed at the idea of me having a life beyond paperwork were now Googling my name under their napkins. I didn't look back. Not to Madison, not to Ryan, not to my parents. There was nothing there I needed to retrieve. But inside that building, I knew what was happening. Madison would be scrambling, flipping through memories, trying to figure out how she'd missed it, how she could have grown up next to a federal judge and still thought of me as the girl who color-coded her school binders and corrected grammar at the dinner table. Because she never saw me. She saw the role I played in her life, and assumed that's all I was ever capable of being. Ryan would probably feel blindsided, maybe even betrayed. Not because I lied, but because I let him carry the wrong narrative without interruption. His discomfort wasn't about truth, it was about ego. And my parents, I didn't need to wonder. I could picture them with haunting clarity, Mom still holding that untouched flute of champagne eyes, clouded, unsure whether to be proud or ashamed. Dad stiff in his chair, probably replaying a lifetime of missed moments he now couldn't justify. They weren't cruel people, just comfortable. And comfort breeds blindness. I was the mirror they avoided for too long, and now it was too clear to ignore. I drove back to the hotel I booked myself. No valets, no chandeliers, just a quiet corner room with blackout curtains and a view of nothing but an empty parking lot. It was perfect. That night, I didn't replay the scene for satisfaction. I didn't gloat. I didn't imagine anyone chasing after me with apologies or realizations. Instead, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who tiptoed around her own needs, who shrank at the dinner table, who thought being serious was something to hide. That girl had waited for permission to be seen. She wasn't waiting anymore. I poured a glass of water, kicked off my shoes, and lay down without turning on the TV. My phone buzzed again. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? You should have said something." I stared at it for a long time. Because I had. Just not in the language they understood. Every quiet dinner, every family trip I flew in for unacknowledged, every birthday I remembered that they forgot, every time I let them think I was fine just so they could keep their comfortable image of me intact. That was me saying it. They just didn't listen. Another message came in. Madison again. "You made me look bad in front of Ryan's family." This was my night. I didn't answer. Because what she didn't realize was that it was never about her night. It wasn't even about me reclaiming space. It was about calling back every piece of myself I'd loaned out to people who used my silence as a cushion for their mediocrity. I wasn't trying to teach a lesson. I was simply finished pretending. And now they had to sit with the realization that I never needed their permission. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I earned it, not in showy ways, not with big declarations, but with quiet, deliberate work. With every case I tried, every sentence I wrote, every time I kept showing up to courtrooms, to holidays, to life without applause. People don't fear the loud ones. They fear the ones who no longer need to explain. Because the moment you stop trying to prove your worth to people who never valued it, that's when they finally see it. And it terrifies them. I didn't go back for dessert. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing sweeter than the silence I left behind. And that silence, it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice, doesn't throw glasses or deliver dramatic monologues. It just exists. Unshakable, steady. The kind that forces a room to recalibrate without anyone needing to shout. That's what I walked away with that night. Not validation, not revenge, but something cleaner, clarity. I used to think being understood was the finish line. That if I just accomplished enough, gave enough, tolerated enough, they would see me, the real me. But what I've learned sitting on that bench, listening to polished lies and desperate pleas for redemption, is this. People don't always want the truth. They want their version of it. And when your truth threatens their comfort, they'll pretend you're the one being difficult. That's what my family did, for decades. They reduced me to a caricature, the cold one, the serious one, the intense one. And when that version stopped working, when it no longer fit the woman standing calmly in a black dress dismantling their assumptions with a single sentence, they didn't adjust. They froze. They felt exposed. Because if I was more than they thought, then maybe they were less than they claimed. And that was the real earthquake. I woke up the next morning to more messages. Mom, we didn't know. You never said anything. Dad, we're proud of you. I mean that. Madison, you could have at least warned me. You made everyone feel stupid. And still, I didn't respond, not out of spite, but because I finally understood something I wish I'd known at 20. When people don't ask, they're telling you they don't care to know. And no amount of explaining can fix that. You can twist yourself into versions that fit their expectations. You can shrink. You can silence your pride, dull your accomplishments, water yourself down. But all that does is teach them to love the mask, not the person underneath, so I stopped masking. And that night when I said those words, I'm a federal judge, it wasn't for them. It was for me. For the girl who once thought being serious meant being less lovable. For the woman who built her entire life from scratch without a single "we're proud of you" from the people who should have said it first. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a seat at their table. I had my own. A bench made of oak and steel and earned respect. A courtroom that listened when I spoke. A life stitched together with purpose, not performance. And for the first time in a long time, I felt full. Not because they finally saw me, but because I no longer cared if they did. There's a moment after every verdict where the courtroom empties out. Lawyers pack their bags. Reporters leave in pairs, whispering headlines to each other. The clerk turns off the lights one by one, and you're left standing there in a room that just held something sacred, something irreversible. That's how it felt waking up the next morning. Quiet, still, final. Except this time I wasn't thinking about defendants or closing arguments. I was thinking about my sister, about how she looked the moment the truth cracked through her carefully staged performance. Like a woman who realized the mirror had been facing her the whole time. I poured myself a coffee and opened the blinds. The sun was low and soft, casting light across the empty parking lot like a stage after curtain call. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. And at that point in my life, real was all I wanted. No curated perfection, no sugar-coated dynamics, just honesty bruised, imperfect, unfiltered. My phone was still buzzing. You didn't have to do that, Madison had texted again. You humiliated me in front of people who matter. People who matter. Funny, isn't it? The people who once thought I didn't matter were now panicking because the people they were trying to impress suddenly saw me differently. I didn't respond. Because I'd already said everything I needed to say without raising my voice, without making a scene, without breaking character. I simply showed up. And they weren't ready for that. A voicemail from my father came next. Rachel, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you'd done so much. Your mom and I were proud of you. We just didn't know how to say it, I guess. Didn't know how. That line caught me. Because I used to believe that. I used to believe that people loved poorly simply because they didn't know better. That if I waited long enough, achieved enough, behaved perfectly enough, they'd learn. But I don't believe that anymore. Because love, real love, doesn't require headlines to be felt. And if you can sit across the table from your child and never ask what they're becoming, never bother to wonder, then the silence isn't accidental. It's chosen. I closed the voicemail without saving it. Not because I was angry, but because I was done carrying the weight of their missed opportunities. People often ask why some women stop coming to family dinners, why they send polite texts but never show up, why they become quiet, distant, unrecognizable. They rarely ask what made her leave herself behind in the first place. Madison had always wanted a stage, a spotlight, a crowd, and for a long time I let her have it. Not because I thought she deserved more, but because I was told in 100 different ways that I deserved less. Less attention, less space, less voice. But somewhere between depositions and sentencing memos, I built something. Something Madison couldn't fabricate and my parents couldn't control. A reputation. A presence that didn't need family approval to matter. And now, on the other side of that ballroom door, I saw my world more clearly than ever. A courtroom full of voices that do listen. Colleagues who see me as a peer, not a punchline. A life with weight, and boundaries, and truth. I wasn't bitter. Bitterness is what people feel when they still want something. I didn't. Not their attention, not their apologies, not their praise. I just wanted them to sit with what they missed. To feel, if only for a moment, what it's like to be on the outside of something they never bothered to understand. Because that's where they'd placed me for most of my life. And now they could stay there. I'd found the door out, and I wasn't coming back to knock. I used to believe silence was what happened when you ran out of things to say, but now I know silence is sometimes the loudest answer you can give. I didn't tell my story that night for applause. I didn't announce my title to make people uncomfortable. I simply stopped hiding. And that was enough to tilt the axis of the room. In the days that followed, the messages continued. Madison sent a long email paragraphs of half apologies woven into complaints. I just didn't know. I feel like you blindsided me. I was trying to protect the vibe of the night. The vibe. As if my life's work years of building justice brick by brick was some kind of off-brand color choice that clashed with her party decor. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because her words weren't for me. They were for her own discomfort. That's the thing no one tells you about power. The moment you stop needing permission to exist, people don't know where to place you anymore. They prefer you in your assigned role, quiet, predictable, manageable. And when you step out of that box, not with a scream, but with truth, they freeze. Not because you changed, but because they never bothered to look. There was something liberating about watching them stumble over the reality of who I had become. I didn't need to say, "You never asked." They were already hearing it in every delayed reaction, every startled whisper, every search bar that now held my name. That was the real shift. Not the look on Ryan's face, not Madison's unraveling smile, not my parents' stunned silence. It was the way the room started to correct itself, subtly, subconsciously. People spoke to me differently, not with deference, but with awareness. Like they realized too late that the person they'd treated like background noise had been writing the narrative all along. I thought I would feel smug, vindicated, but mostly I felt still. Not the kind of stillness that comes with defeat, but the kind that arrives when you no longer need to move for others to feel your presence. I went back to work the next Monday as if nothing had happened. My clerk greeted me with a fresh docket and a strong cup of coffee. "Quiet weekend?" she asked. I smiled. Productive. She didn't ask more. She didn't need to. Because here in my courtroom, people do listen. They stand when I enter. They call me Your Honor, not because they're forced to, but because I earned that respect. Not with noise, not with charm, but with consistency, with purpose, with weight. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself to anyone. That was the final freedom, the kind that doesn't need to be declared. It just is. Like a ruling handed down with confidence, like a truth that settles into the air and stays there undeniable. They had spent years calling me too serious, too cold, too much. And now they were the ones too stunned to speak. And I finally understood I was never too much. I was simply more than they were ready to see. I haven't seen Madison since that night. No follow-up dinners, no phone calls, no real apology, but she's posted plenty. Photos of brunches and baby showers, curated captions that say family is everything in looping script fonts. I scroll past them now without feeling much of anything. Just detachment. Like watching a movie I've already seen the ending of. And my parents. They tried in their own way, a Christmas card signed in both their names with a line at the bottom that read, "Hope to catch up soon." No specifics, no ownership, just space-filling ink. I didn't send one back, not to be cruel, but because I no longer believe in maintaining relationships purely out of history. Blood isn't bond. Sometimes it's just biology and tradition wrapped in guilt and expectation. And I had finally laid that weight down. People ask me now how I stayed so composed, how I didn't yell, how I didn't make a scene. They assume it's because I'm trained, a judge, a woman of discipline. But the truth is simpler. You stop chasing people once you realize your peace doesn't depend on their understanding. I used to believe that my worth was something I had to prove, that if I could just achieve enough, I'd earn my seat at the table, that if I stayed quiet long enough, they'd reward me with acknowledgement, that if I didn't stir the waters, they'd finally look beneath the surface. But people don't notice what they never intend to see. And I had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. So no, I don't regret standing up in that ballroom. I don't regret naming who I am, not for the shock it caused, not for the silence it demanded, but because it was the first time in my family's presence that I spoke without shrinking. And what followed wasn't chaos. It was truth. Unapologetic. Final. I walk into my courtroom each day with the same posture now that I had that night. Shoulders back, chin level, voice calm. People think power is about volume. But the strongest voices aren't always loud. They're just rooted. And mine is rooted in years of self-respect I had to learn in the absence of applause. Rooted in every decision I made when no one was watching. Rooted in knowing that justice doesn't begin in court. It begins at home with how we let people speak to us, how we let them remember us, and how we finally decide to rewrite that memory. So no, I won't be calling Madison. I won't be attending the next reunion. I won't be explaining myself to people who mistook my silence for submission, because I don't owe anyone an apology for becoming exactly who I was meant to be. I am Rachel Whitman, federal judge, daughter, sister, survivor of quiet erasure, and I no longer whisper to be heard. I simply speak, and the world adjusts.